Welcome back to the special report with Stacy Washington. It's my pleasure to welcome Caleb Kruckenberg, Litigation Counsel for New Civil Liberties Alliance, to discuss the CDC trying to stop eviction court proceedings because of the pandemic. Come on, if you own rental property, Caleb, this is like the worst year ever for you.
Absolutely. This, I have clients that have come to me from, really across the country, and they all tell me the same thing. They were hurting to begin with, and then come along September, the CDC said it's now a federal crime if you go to state court and try to evict your tenants who aren't paying your rent. And so, they're stuck. They have these tenants who they're not paying. They haven't been paying for months on end. And, my clients can't do anything about it.
So what is the recourse? Because you're an attorney. They're obviously coming to you to help them get redress. I understand the CDC is trying to stop there from being an even larger homeless problem in the United States, and there already is. But isn't it a possibility that landlords could become homeless? Because if you lose one property and, you could kind of go into a negative spiral without extra income you were using to live off of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And, what's happened is the CDC, which is an administrative agency that's supposed to be about protecting public health, has decided basically that landlords are responsible for the economic fallout. And, it's obviously nobody wants to evict anybody. Nobody's happy when a tenant's not paying rent, but the CDC basically just picked winners and losers, and they said, well, if you're a landlord, it's your responsibility. And unfortunately, like I said, I've heard from people all over the country, and, they're looking at evictions themselves because they might go into foreclosure. Because, a lot of landlords, they have a couple of properties, they have a mortgage on the property, they still have to pay it, even if nobody's paying them rent.
Yeah, and I think so renters, I'm not talking about people who've had mortgages before or, kind of fully grown adult renters, but younger people who are renting always assume that the landlord owns this property free and clear, and every penny that I pay them in rent is going for them to, fund their Lamborghinis and their vacations to the beach. And so if I skip this month's rent, they're not out of anything really because they've got so much money. When the reality of it is that a lot of people, not only do they have the mortgages, but they have the maintenance costs and they have other bills that they're paying with anything extra that's coming off of the property. And you have to maintain some semblance of a little emergency fund just in case your tenant breaks a window or their kid, rips out screen, whatever. You have to have some contingency funds. So there is no, landlord that has so many different properties that they don't need any of the money that comes from the properties to actually maintain them or to go back into the business, because it is a business being a landlord.
Right. And, most of the landlords in this country, residential landlords, have 10 or fewer properties. And like you said, the margins are very small for an individual rental property. You have, like you said, the mortgage, insurance, things like that. But, the situation right now, my clients, they have to provide housing to their tenants. And if they don't, if they fall back on maintenance or don't pay the water bill, their tenants can sue them. And their tenants can actually take them to court and get damages. But my clients have been forbidden by the CDC order from going to court and doing anything about their tenants. And like I said, it's actually a federal crime now to go to housing court in whatever state and try to evict someone who's not paying you rent.
Yeah, so you're literally stuck in between two boulders, and the boulders are moving towards you. So when you're representing some of these people, what do you plan to do to help them get out from between those two hideous boulders?
Well, as you might guess, my organization and I think this is completely illegal. And the CDC is an administrative agency. It's not Congress. It's not the president. They don't have the power to do this. And, they certainly don't have the power to tell the states that they are not allowed to have housing courts. They can't address housing problems on their own. So we filed a lawsuit in Atlanta, which is where the CDC is headquartered. And, you know, the argument is pretty simple. The CDC just doesn't have this kind of power. And if Congress tried to give them this power, it would violate the Constitution. And so we've asked that the CDC order be stopped because, you know, my clients and landlords across the country, you know, they're suffering because of this. And it's something that the CDC never should have done in the first place.
So I agree on that, but where did they derive the authority to do it? Because it just seems like such a huge overreach. So is there something that I don't know about in the Federal Register or their authority as the CDC where they can make a rule this is damaging, it's personally limiting, I can't see where it's constitutional, but I don't know.
Well, so the CDC is invoking a statute that was passed in 1945 that gives the CDC the power to impound livestock and quarantine, diseased items and things like that. And it has a list of things that they're allowed to do. And the prevailing theme in all these things that they're allowed to do is that when someone is sick or when something is diseased, then they can take some limited action. But there's a part of that statute that says, or any other reasonable measure. And the CDC has said basically, well, that means we can do literally anything that we can think of, as long as we say it's for disease control. So, you know, they've said that it's necessary to change landlord-tenant law across the country because of disease control. And obviously that's not what they're doing. That's not really what they're trying to do. What they're trying to do is, address what they see as an eviction crisis, but by doing that, by, attacking landlords and putting the financial problem and the financial obligation onto the landlords.
So when you sue, and you're suing the CDC, I'm assuming, or are you suing,
yes.
Them and other? So you're suing the CDC. So the procedure then is that the CDC will have their own legal team and go up in court and justify this blanket, injunction on doing normal landlord type things. Do you think the courts are going to side with them and say that what they're doing is lawful and constitutional and permissible?
Well, unfortunately, so far with our lawsuit, we asked for what's called a preliminary injunction, which is we wanted the court to step in immediately. The court declined to do that. And I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation where, when you have an agency like the CDC, they say the magic words. They say pandemic or emergency. And I think a lot of courts are willing to give them, a lot of slack, even though their arguments are sort of laughable. And what they've argued in court, they haven't ever said it's really necessary to help protect people, it's important, or anything like that. They've just said, well, we think maybe this could help, and we have unlimited power to do whatever we want. And, it's very concerning that, at least so far, the courts have been willing to let this pass, under this pretext of an emergency. And, really, the Constitution doesn't stop just because there's an emergency. And an agency doesn't just get to do whatever it wants just because there's a disease. And so, we keep fighting. We're hoping that eventually the courts will stop this and they'll say, no, this is not acceptable. You can't do this anymore. Because, we're really concerned that if they can get away with this, what can't the CDC do?
Well, I wonder, is there anything that they could dream up that they think, now that we've stopped people from getting evicted, maybe these landlords should just continue to provide these places for free and maybe even give the people who live there a stipend. And they might order that to happen. At this point, is anything too far-fetched?
Using their own logic, there's no doubt that the CDC thinks it could order everyone in America to never leave their house again, because it's dangerous if you meet with strangers. And I mean, that is seriously the thread that they're hanging this on. They're saying, well, if people get evicted, they might interact with other people once they leave their apartments, and therefore they could spread disease. So we have to stop that. And, it is extremely troublesome. And, if you just look at the CDC order, it's effective through the end of the year. So, they've said no evictions until 2021, unless we extend it. And, unfortunately, things don't seem to be changing. And I think this is going to be extended. And, in coming 2021, I think we could see even more measures. And so it's really important that we establish the precedent now that agencies like the CDC just can't do this.
I love it. I think it's absolutely appropriate, and I hope you win, because in what I've seen here in St. Louis from our county executive is he said, well, we may have to have even more draconian measures before we get out of this year, and certainly they would last until after the vaccine is widely disseminated. But my question is always, first of all, how do you plan on forcing people to take the vaccine, because there are so many people who don't plan to take it? And second of all, what will you do if the vaccine is disseminated and we still have COVID-19? Because we have a vaccine for the flu and we still have the flu as well. So what will you then do? Will you just lock people into their homes, and if you come out, shoot them? If they come out, burn their homes to the ground? What won't you resort to prove that you can beat this virus by controlling people? This is the only time we've ever approached it this way. I mean, I know that desperate times, desperate measures, but we're beyond even that. This is past desperation. It's despotic, and the people who are doing it seem completely oblivious to how outrageous these demands and mandates and new laws, quote fingers they're making up, actually are.
And, I think one of the real problems, too, is the source of these orders. You're seeing a lot of governors doing executive orders, seeing a lot of agencies like the CDC doing these sort of orders. These aren't laws. They're not passed by the legislature. They're not passed by Congress. But they're doing all the heavy lifting, and they're making crimes, and they're restricting really core civil liberties. But it's not coming from the right place, and I think that's really, unfortunately, a symptom of the modern trend of executive power, of administrative power. I mean, that's really what my organization is all about. We fight that every day. But unfortunately, now that there's a crisis, it's just government is exploiting that. They have the power in the agencies, they have the power in the executives, and they're doing just terrifying things every single day.
Well, the good news is that we have Caleb Kruckenberg, Litigation Counsel for New Civil Liberties Alliance. You're out there, and you're giving them as good as they're given out to us, and you're defending the liberties that we hold them dear. We should hold them even more dear after this current demonstration. We're 260 days into flattening the curve or slowing the spread, and we don't appear to be any closer to accomplishing that or getting free of these mandates. And I think the only thing that will help is litigation, and that's what you're making to happen, and we really appreciate that and your time tonight here on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. Hope to talk to you again soon. Have a great weekend.
You too.